Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into some really thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah.
How we look at the value of animal life versus human life.
Yeah, and what kicked this off for us was this book, Panakad, That's Dog Philosophy, and an article about it.
Right, an article that digs into how the book's ideas kind of, well, interact with some very human-focused religious beliefs.
Exactly. The article points out that dog philosophy, even though it's not directly setting out to critique religion, sort of forces a conversation because, so many faiths basically assume humans are top dog, pardon the pun.
Right. So our mission today is to really understand what dog philosophy is arguing about this human bias, and then explore how different religions see the whole animal versus human significance thing.
Let's do it.
Okay, so maybe we start with some of the big religious traditions, the Abrahamic ones, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. They often seem to have a clear hierarchy, don't they?
They generally do, yeah. The article highlights that a common element is the creation story. God makes the universe, puts humanity at the top.
Made in his image, that whole idea.
Precisely. Humans are often seen as, well, special, almost like God's main project, undergoing a test here on Earth.
And our actions determine what happens next, eternally.
Right. Heaven or something else. So the whole story really centers on the human experience.
Okay, so where do animals fit into that picture then? It sounds like they're maybe supporting characters.
That's a good way to put it. Often in that framework, animals are seen as created for humans, for help, companionship, food, or just part of the world humans rule over.
Dominion, yeah.
The main plot line is human. What happens to us, especially after death?
So a clear hierarchy. Humans first, animals. Serving a purpose for humans.
That's the core idea in many interpretations within those faiths, yes. It sets the stage for a lot of other views.
Okay, now let's switch gears a bit. What about the dharmic religions? Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism? The article says there are some interesting differences there.
Yeah, it gets more complex. With ideas like karma, cause and effect, and rebirth, these traditions often see human birth as, well, quite special. It's rare.
A rare opportunity.
A really valuable one, yeah. A chance for spiritual growth, working towards liberation, moksha in Hinduism, nirvana in Buddhism.
And animals in this view.
They're generally seen as facing more obstacles on that path, more limitations.
But hang on, compassion towards animals is huge in these religions, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Crucial. Even if humans have this perceived greater potential for enlightenment, there's a very strong emphasis on ahimsa, non-harming.
So not just don't kill them.
It ranges, from strict vegetarianism in Jainism, for example, to rules about minimizing suffering if animals are used, like specific methods for slaughter in Islam, aiming to be quick and painless.
That's interesting. And the article mentioned historical shifts, too, like Christianity moving away from animal sacrifice.
Yeah, that's a point Professor DeMello highlighted. It shows these views aren't static, they evolve over time, which is fascinating in itself.
Definitely. Okay, let's dive a deeper into Buddhism specifically. The article brought up some intriguing points about animal limitations, but also their potential.
Yes, what's really interesting is the Buddhist idea that animals, like us, have the 5 khandhas, the aggregates.
That's like our basic components: body,
Yeah.
feelings, perception.
Exactly. Form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness.
Yeah.
They have these building blocks of experience too. But the common interpretation is that their ability to reach enlightenment is, well, limited compared to humans.
But then you get these stories in the scriptures that seem to kind of contradict that. The article mentioned a dog, Gosaka. What's that about?
The Gosaka story. It's quite something. This dog showed incredible devotion to a Pacceka Buddha, that's like an enlightened being who doesn't teach widely.
Okay.
And because of Gosaka's loving actions guiding the Buddha, protecting him, the dog's karma was really positive. So positive, in fact, that he was reborn as a deva.
A deva, like a god or celestial being.
Yeah, a being in a higher realm, a much better state of existence. It shows potential, right? Potential for good karma and better rebirth,
Yeah.
even for an animal.
Wow. And there was another one about a frog.
Yes. The frog story is also amazing. This frog was near the Buddha while he was teaching. It couldn't understand the words, the concepts,
Right.
but it just focused intently on the sound of the Dharma, the teaching. It felt some kind of peace or connection just from the sound.
And that was enough.
Apparently, it gained merit just from that focus. Then, sadly, it was accidentally killed by a cowherd's staff But because of the merit it had accumulated just by listening, it was instantly reborn as a deva in a heavenly realm.
That's incredible. So these stories suggest animals can make significant spiritual progress. But the article hinted there's some tension with how these are viewed today.
There is. You have these Jataka tale stories of the Buddha's past lives where animals are often heroes showing great virtue, even teaching humans.
Yeah.
But the more dominant sort of human-centric view in a lot of modern Buddhist interpretation tends to see these more as allegories.
Like fables. Teaching tools, not literal accounts of enlightened animals.
Pretty much. Useful stories, yes, but maybe not proof that animals can reach the highest states in their current form. The article even points to an image that kind of reinforces this human focus in modern Buddhism.
So even with all the emphasis on compassion, there's still this underlying human preference.
It often seems that way when you dig into the interpretations, especially around the ultimate goal of enlightenment.
Okay, what about Mahayana Buddhism? The article suggested it might be a bit more inclusive, but there was a catch.
Right, the Lotus Sutra example. It tells the story of the Dragon King's daughter. She listens to the sutra and achieves enlightenment right then and there.
Okay, that sounds pretty inclusive. Dragon, not human.
Exactly. It's often cited to show that all beings, regardless of form, have the potential for Buddhahood. This is a key difference from some Theravada views, which are often seen as focusing more on human potential for Buddhahood.
So what's the catch you mentioned?
The catch is what happens the instant she becomes enlightened.
What?
She immediately transforms. She becomes male and appears in a form like a human or a deva.
Oh. So she couldn't stay a dragon. Or female.
Apparently not in this telling. It suggests that even when non-humans can attain enlightenment, the ultimate enlightened form is still perceived as, well, human-like and male.
Wow. That points to a pretty persistent bias, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Both anthropocentric and maybe gendered, too.
It definitely highlights how deep-seated these assumptions can be even within traditions that preach universal compassion.
Okay, this is fascinating. We've seen these religious views, mostly human-centered but with nuances. Now, the article throws a real curveball with the Church of Euthanasia. This sounds different.
Oh, completely different. We're talking the absolute other end of the spectrum here.
Tell me about them. Founded in the 90s.
Yeah, 1992 by Chris Korda and Robert Kimberg. Their core belief is summed up in their slogan, "Save the planet, kill yourself."
Whoa, okay, that's blunt.
Extremely. It's a radical anti-humanist stance. They basically argue that humanity is a virus, a destructive force, and the planet would be infinitely better off without us.
So the opposite of humans being the pinnacle of creation.
The absolute polar opposite. It really forces you to confront the entire spectrum of how life can be valued.
What do they actually, do based on that belief?
Well, their activism follows from it. They advocate for things like legal abortion, even suicide, cannibalism, sodomy, anything non-procreative to reduce the human population.
Right, population reduction is key.
And the article mentions an excerpt from one of their prayers. It's quite shocking. It explicitly places humanity at the bottom, lower than animals, lower than plants, lower than insects.
Goodness. That's a complete inversion of the usual order. It definitely challenges the foundations of value.
It certainly does. And that kind of radical challenge brings us back neatly to the book that started this dog philosophy.
Right. Okay. So how does it tackle this idea of human superiority?
Well, the book, as the article explains, is really trying to get us to understand animals better on their own terms. There's a specific chapter mentioned, The Life of Dogs, Can Animals Live Meaningful Lives? By Michael Hauskeller.
Okay. Can they? What does it argue?
It looks at how we often just assume animals are lower. We even use the idea of an animal's life as a metaphor for a meaningless human life, living like an animal.
Yeah, that's true. We do that.
But the article brings in the philosopher Thaddeus Metz's view here. He sort of represents a common idea that human meaning comes from rising above our animal nature.
How so?
By connecting with things like reason, complex ethics, higher virtues, things he argues animals can't access because they lack our kind of rational thought.
Okay, that makes sense as a philosophical position. But the translator of that chapter, Prasad Chinja, pushes back on this, right?
He really does. Chinja questions if we really know what's going on in an animal's mind. Are we sure a bird building an incredibly intricate nest isn't exercising some form of creativity?
Or a monkey swinging through trees, is that just instinct, or is there joy, maybe even a kind of aesthetic sense?
Exactly. Chinja points out how little we actually understand about animal consciousness and creativity, and he stresses how subjective value and happiness are. Meaning, Just because we might think an activity is pointless, like, I don't know, maybe someone binge watching a show seems unproductive to an outsider, doesn't mean it lacks meaning or happiness for the person doing it.
Right. Who are we to judge someone else's source of meaning or happiness, whether they're human or animal?
Precisely. And Chinja challenges the idea that meaning only comes from contributing to human society.
The article had a stark example for that.
The lab animals, yeah. It's uncomfortable, but it makes the point. We might deem a lab animal's life meaningful because its suffering benefits human science.
Like Laika, the space dog mentioned in the article. Her mission was meaningful for humans, but for her.
Exactly. It forces us to ask, meaningful according to whom? And is benefit to humans the only valid measure of meaning? It's a tough ethical knot.
It really is. And it highlights how hard it is to judge meaning from the outside based on our own standards.
Yeah, the article uses the example of someone spending hours in prayer or meditation. From a purely productive viewpoint, it might look like nothing's happening.
But for the person doing it, it could be deeply meaningful, couldn't it?
Absolutely. So, dog philosophy, by making us consider meaning in animal lives, kind of circles back to make us question how we judge meaning in human lives, too.
It opens things up. Maybe there isn't just one way to live a valuable life.
That seems to be the implication. It suggests we should be open to diverse paths to happiness and meaning, maybe ones that don't fit neatly into our own religious or cultural boxes.
So understanding animals better might actually help us understand ourselves and each other better.
I think that's a key takeaway. The book seems to call for respecting individual choices in finding or maybe creating meaning, or even choosing not to pursue meaning in a conventional sense.
And Hauskeller's argument, the chapter author.
His core point, as the article frames it, is that a dog's life can be meaningful even without bringing religion into it, just based on its own experiences, its joys, its connections.
It's an invitation, then, to consider that perspective even if you don't fully agree.
Exactly. It's food for thought.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've covered a lot of ground. From the very human-centered views in many major religions,
To the more nuanced takes in Dharmic traditions, with their ideas of karma and compassion.
then that sharp turn into radical anti-humanism with the Church of Euthanasia.
And finally, the philosophical challenge from dog philosophy, really asking us to question that inherent human superiority we often assume.
And boiling it all down, it seems to center on this really fundamental question.
Can we actually truly objectively judge the meaning or the value of any life, human or animal?
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If our whole idea of meaning is so wrapped up in being human, what are we missing?
Yeah. What about the experiences of the non-human world? The richness, the variety. Reflecting on that maybe help us understand ourselves and each other in a broader way.
Definitely something to keep pondering. Thanks for
Uh-huh.
taking this deep dive with us today.